When Turkish F16s brought down that Russian fighter plane November 24th along the Syrian border, the respective governments and the media outlets they tend to control presented very different versions of the facts. Ankara said that the plane violated Turkish airspace, that it warned the pilot umpteen times to change course. Moscow refuted that. It said that Turkey shot down the warplane over Syrian territory, that it was a stab in the back by the accomplices of terrorists. The warring narratives were then amplified in the media of two countries where challenging the official line is a risky journalistic business. Case in point, the two journalists at the Turkish daily Cumhuriyet, who stand accused of, quote, aiding a terrorist organization. They reported 7 months ago, backed up with what they called video evidence, that Turkey's intelligence service, MIT, had tried to send a convoy of weapons to Syria. The conflict in Syria is a geopolitical minefield, which is why Presidents Tayyip Erdogan and Vladimir Putin seem determined to keep a tight grip on the narrative. And all too often, that comes at the expense of media freedom. Our starting point this week is the Turkish border with Syria. Two leaders, both with a taste for ceremony and the trappings of power, both presiding over countries that were once empires, both accused by their own citizens of having an authoritarian streak and using it against their own domestic media outlets, and both now using those outlets to have this story told their way.
Türk jetlerinin müdahalesi öncesinde sınır ihlali yaptığı kesin.
Эрдоган подсел на дешевую нефть от варварского халифата, который в мире называют Даиш.
Well, when we compare Putin and Erdogan, both are very powerful political leaders, and they control their domestic public opinion through Turkish and Russian media. The Turkish media is controlled by the Turkish government. There are very few opposition newspapers, and it became almost a national cause in the Turkish media.
Putin is definitely more sophisticated and advanced media master and manipulator than Erdogan. The Russian media system is really largely controlled by the government, by the Kremlin, or Putin himself. The majority of the Russian people get information from the Russian television, and all major TV channels are controlled by the government.
Russia definitely has the upper hand here because it has a history of financing a strong and sophisticated propaganda machine. Russia is inundating with its message, and Turkey doesn't have that.
The first wave of coverage after the Russian warplane was shot down focused on the basic technical questions. Was it in Turkish airspace or not? Were the pilots warned or weren't they? But by the next day, the Russian media were making it personal. They were making it about President Erdogan and his family.
Семейный бизнес Эрдогана. Почему президенту Турции от поражения ИГИЛ одни убытки?
Moscow-based channels, including the Russian language Rossiya 24 and the English language RT, both zeroed in on allegations that Erdogan, through his son Bilal, was profiting from oil deals with ISIL.
Сын турецкого президента Билал приносит в бюджет семьи миллионы долларов, занимаясь поставками нефти со скважин, захваченных террористами в Сирии.
To back up their story, they ran with this image, alleging it showed Bilal Erdogan with two ISIL leaders. It turns out the two weren't warlords, they were more like waiters.
There is a Ukrainian website called Stop Fake that dedicates its work to dismantling RT's propaganda. So this website published one of its stories, basically rebutting whatever RT was saying about Bilal Erdogan. And it turns out that it's not ISIS warlords, it's just a Turkish restaurant in which Bilal Erdogan was seen once.
There's been an awful lot of contradictory information, but when it comes to Turkey's links to ISIL, journalists, including those in the West, have already reported on this. It's not a new topic, it's just become a new topic in the Russian media. That, of course, isn't a coincidence. It started right after the fighter jet was shot down. Russian journalists started talking critically about various Turkish issues.
Both Putin's Russia and Erdogan's Turkey have brought large parts of their domestic media to heel, although there are differences in both approach and degree. If Russia has an edge, It's in taking its narrative to the outside world, in English and other languages. The Kremlin-funded RT network launched in English in 2005.
Well, a very good morning to you.
In Arabic in 2007 and Spanish in 2009. Turkey's English language equivalent, TRT World, is a news website. It's running test transmissions, but has yet to launch on television. And while its followers on Twitter and viewers on YouTube number in the thousands, RTs are in the millions. Advantage, Moscow.
Russia has put enormous amount of money in launching Russia Today, now RT, as the channel that will give the Russian message to the international audiences, using English speakers, creating footage in various international languages. Turkey, again, didn't have that.
В Турции меньше ресурсов.
Turkey has fewer resources. TRT World's resources don't compare with RT. Maybe now, after this incident, Turkey's going to try strengthening its presence in the international media, just as Russia has done.
Как это делает Россия?
Journalists in both countries who contest the respective official narratives can pay the price, but the two governments go about it differently. Both have their primary focus on TV news. However, the Turkish authorities also go after critical print journalists, like the editor and Ankara correspondent of Cumhuriyet. 7 months ago, the paper published a story about Turkish weapons shipments into Syria. And on November 26th, 2 days after the plane was shot down, and just as the Russian media started reporting on links between the Turkish government and ISIL, the Cumhuriyet journalists were jailed following a criminal complaint filed by President Erdogan himself.
They reported how Turkey sent military equipment and weapons to some opposition fighters in Syria. This case is important because there are crucial questions about how Turkey is helping these opposition fighters, and according to international law, it might create problems for the Turkish government. Therefore, Can Dündar and Erdem Gül was portrayed as betraying the Turkish state. They are portrayed as an internal enemy.
These two arrests of Can Dündar and Erdem Gül are the latest in a line of arrests on very similar charges. But again, for Erdogan, this is not an exception, it's rather the rule. He oftentimes goes in a public forum and he takes the time to single out particular journalists that he doesn't like, whose coverage he doesn't agree with.
Bu haberi özel haber olarak yapan kişi de öyle zannediyorum ki bunun bedelini ağır ödeyecek.
And CPJ, as a press freedom group, has criticized those appearances repeatedly.
RT broadcasted an interview with the journalists of that newspaper.
They said watching Cumhuriyet's notorious video is enough to draw plenty of suspicion.
And it was really funny because back in Russia, there is a crackdown on Russian independent media and no one talks about it, including RT.
This is a story about high crimes, what really happened in the sky that day, and media misdemeanors. There is punditry aplenty about Russia's new czar and Turkey's new sultan, although with the media, Vladimir Putin is more general secretary than czar. Moscow has a long history of controlling the media from the Soviet era that Ankara does not. And on the coverage of this story, it shows. On the download now, our viewers weigh in on the dueling narratives on the conflict between Turkey and Russia.
This is part of classic Russian strategy to go for the jugular, to exaggerate, to say the most outrageous thing, which is possible because nobody is bringing either the government or media to account. But we shouldn't forget that just as this sort of stream of vitriol that we're seeing directed against Turkey can be turned on at the drop of a hat, it can also be turned off at the drop of a hat, just as easy.
The Kremlin-funded channels, Sputnik and Russia Today, are very professional and very experienced in propaganda making. And Anatolian Agency and TRT channels are just beginning to learn the craft. But of course this is a part of the problem itself, all this propaganda making. What the Anatolian News Agency and the TRT channels do, is that they emphasize Ankara's point of view in a very overt way. The Turkish opposition itself is very much, for example, under the influence of Sputnik. They like it a lot.